Bum, 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 bum.
Well, we are both physically here and no one's traveling, right? Are you traveling?
I'm going to PAS, but not for a little bit.
So we're going to be in the same place for like a week.
Yes.
So we won't be having to record at midnight anymore.
Rolling forward, Dr. Sister Science Facts.
And welcome back to this week's episode of the Rolling Forward podcast.
I'm Dr. Alicia Rolin.
I'm Dr. Stephanie Rolin.
I'm a pediatrician.
I'm a psychiatrist.
We're both clinicians and researchers.
And podcasters. So here we are. We like to do this because health news is confusing.
So confusing, and it can come at you so fast.
It really does. And today is no exception. So our idea for this week's episode started with the headline that sounded like satire, but it turns out that it's not. There's a San Francisco startup that is now working with the state of Utah to use an AI system to renew psychiatric medications.
I'm sorry, what?
I know, it's just one of these moments where your immediate reaction is absolutely not. AI should not be prescribing medications.
Psychiatric medication.
And you read the details and realize, okay, it's more narrow than it sounds on the surface, but I still have so many questions.
So, we're going to walk through this episode in 4 parts. First, we're going to talk about what's actually happening in Utah, because that sounds wild.
Yeah.
Second, we're going to talk about how medicine usually introduces new treatments and why this is different.
So different.
Then we're going to talk about what research actually says about AI, especially in pediatrics. And finally, what families should realistically do right now.
Especially for our listeners that are in Utah and might have access to this new program. So let's get started.
Rolling forward, Dr. Sister Science Facts.
So, what actually is happening here?
All right. So this is a 12-month pilot that is starting in Utah involving a San Francisco-based startup called Legion Help. And they are piloting the use of AI in a very specific way to renew prescriptions for existing psychiatric medications.
So, it's not diagnosing, it's not starting a new prescription.
Exactly. No new prescriptions, and also no controlled substances. So certain medications like stimulants are excluded. And there are some more strict exclusion, things like if you've been recently hospitalized, or if a patient has suicidality or mania, or if they're pregnant, or if the medication needs to be changed. Those are all exclusions.
So, this is meant to be for stable, low-risk patients that go get their medications refilled X amount of times a year, and no changes are really happening.
That's the intention. Patients do have to opt in. They have to verify their identity. And there are required escalation pathways to human clinicians.
And the argument for this is access.
That's exactly what's being said. The idea is that routine refills are creating bottlenecks, and especially in a place like Utah, where there are not that many clinicians. So if AI can handle routine refills, clinicians can then focus on higher risk care.
But my concern is that psychiatry is not just continue the same medication at the same dose forever.
Right. So that's the thing. We're both medical doctors. I did 4 extra years of training in general psychiatry in order to be a psychiatrist. So we're talking about using an AI model, not a medical doctor who's not trained in psychiatry to do psychiatry. So, stability is not always obvious, and there are some real clinical questions that psychiatrists are trained to answer. In every patient visit, I think, what's changed? What are we missing? Is this still the right diagnosis? Is this still the right treatment? And that's true for patients who have been on the same medications for decades.
So let's talk about how this actually came to be. Because this feels very different than how we introduce new treatment models, new systems.
Exactly. This is a key issue, not just that we're using AI to prescribe, but that this has not been through the structured pathways that new interventions usually go through. So we are both researchers. We develop and test new treatments, and it takes a long time.
Just that baseline. First, You need IRB approval. So the Institutional Review Board, they review everything. They make sure that things are not violating human rights, that are not violating ethical rights. They have a lot of opinions, and they give really good feedback on all projects.
All projects, including minimal risk projects, must go through an IRB if they are human subjects research.
You want to do a chart review? IRB. You want to start a new medication? IRB. You want to open a new wing to the hospital to do AI treatment?
IRB. And then you also need informed consent from research participants. You need monitoring of safety ongoing and clear study protocols, exactly what you're doing and why. You can't just start doing things and then come up with a research question later.
There's really formal oversight of risk.
And if we're talking about a device or some new clinical software or a medication, there's also these FDA pathways where they have investigational studies and they overview safety and effectiveness data and regulatory review. You can't just start doing things.
And this process is slow.
Intentionally slow, because the goal is to answer, does this work? Who does it work for? What are the risks and what are the unintended consequences?
And how does it compare to the existing standard of care?
So it really is about measuring and balancing the risks and benefits and not taking an unproven, untested intervention, exposing it to a lot of people and thereby possibly exposing them to risk.
So what are they doing here? What's different here?
This is not the traditional research pathway of developing and testing new interventions. This is phrased as a state-level regulatory pilot. So it's being marketed as a controlled rollout of a workflow rather than a classic clinical trial.
So we don't exactly have years of evidence behind this exact model before they're trying it on humans.
There is not a mature published evidence base for AI-driven psychiatric medications refills in real-world practice.
And that's a huge gap.
It is. And that means we're way earlier in the evidence cycle than people might assume when they get a pop-up after they log into their healthcare website that says, hey, see this new AI. They might not realize that this is brand new.
Totally unproven.
We do know things about AI in medicine. We have research about AI in medicine, even if this particular model is new.
AI performs really well in pattern recognition, structured data, really well-defined narrow tasks.
And in control studies, AI can perform well for these narrow tasks in structured conditions. But these are not real-world, fully autonomous settings.
So the strongest evidence for AI at the current moment is to use it as a support tool.
Not a replacement for physicians or clinical expertise.
And that's how a lot of physicians are currently using AI. They're asking it questions, they're guiding it through patient cases, and then they're reviewing the information and merging it with their own knowledge and expertise.
As opposed to letting AI drive the bus. You don't let AI drive the bus.
But do you let the pigeon drive the bus?
And now thinking about kids, I think it's important to focus on kids as a separate population when we're talking about AI or anything in medicine, because apparently children are not just little adults.
And in general, pediatrics is where evidence gets much, 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 much thinner. It's a lot harder to do clinical trials, to do a lot of research on small humans.
There was a recent study in JAMA Pediatrics looking at the availability of AI or machine learning enabled devices that were authorized for children by the FDA. And this found, like you're saying, that only 17% of existing AI or machine learning enabled medical devices are labeled for pediatric use, which means more than 80% are just labeled for adult use. And this study went into more detail about that 17% that were labeled for pediatric use. And they found that less than 1 in 5 of the medical devices had clearly reported pediatric validation data in order to get that, which is wild.
That's really small. That's really small. And this is a problem because kids are different.
And that's why you did 3 years of residency in pediatrics after medical school to learn things about kids that I don't know.
Kids differ in physiology, in development, in communication, and disease patterns. You can't just scale down adult data.
And when we're talking about child psychiatry, that adds another layer because medication in kids are often weight-based. And so you can't just use a smaller version of an adult dose. You really need to understand the child's weight in order to calculate the correct dose. And kids are growing all of the time. If you have a child in your life, you know they're constantly growing out of their pants, shoes, socks, everything. And during growth spurts, we might need to be recalculating those doses at each and every visit.
And psychiatry adds another layer.
Because it's not just symptoms. There's a family context, a school, what is sleep like, development, behavior patterns. Sure, it seems like a routine refill, but there's a lot of context-dependent factors that might not be picked up by an AI model.
I think this is where the signal is a lot less clear. A lot about psychiatry is about nuance, and that's where AI really struggles.
They struggle so much with nuance. And you're probably using AI in your life too. What we're hearing is that parents are using AI to think about symptoms. My child is coughing and has a sore throat. What could this be? They're thinking about triage. This happened. Should I go to the emergency department? And that makes sense, but there are some real limitations with these AI models.
In a 2026 analysis, an AI triage tool frequently under-triaged cases that physicians said needed urgent care.
And the limitations were even clearer for psychiatry, where AI had inconsistent detection of suicide risk.
Which is terrifying.
So, Alicia, what should families actually do? AI is here. I don't think it's going anywhere. It's getting rolled out in this way. What should people do?
I think the capacities of AI are amazing. They can help improve and streamline our life, but AI should be used as a support tool, not as a decision maker. It shouldn't be deciding what medication you should be on. It shouldn't be refilling your medications without testing. And it shouldn't be deciding whether or not your kid is safe to stay at home or go to the emergency department.
So it sounds like a good use of AI is to summarize information, generate questions, and to explain medical concepts.
It should not be used for diagnosis, triage, medical decisions, emergency decisions.
And especially not for kids, because as we've learned, the data is even weaker there.
So the question isn't, is AI all good or all bad? The question is, what task is it doing? Was it validated? Was it validated in kids? And is a clinician involved at any point in the process?
So, in summary, the takeaway here is AI in medicine is real. Some of it is useful, but we are still early, especially in psychiatry and pediatrics.
And AI can help is not the same as AI should decide.
Because in kids' health, the hardest part is not just the information, it's that context, development, and judgment.
And that's our episode for today.
Rolling forward, Dr. Sister Science Facts.
Send this to someone you know who might be using AI for their health questions.
Which is increasingly everyone.
Leave us a 5-star review if you found it helpful.
You can hit us up on socials. Send us an email at RolinForwardShow. That's ROLIN @gmail.com.
And thanks for joining us.
I'm Dr. Alicia Rolin.
I'm Dr. Stephanie Rolin.
See you next week.
Rolling forward, Dr. Sister Science Facts.
So my favorite part about AI is we use AI to transcribe the transcripts of this. And even though every single week it does this, we say, email us at the RolinForwardShow@gmail.com. That's ROLIN /show. It never once has spelled Rolin correctly.
Well, it'll say ROLIN R-O-L-I-N, and then it'll put Rolling Forward Show. It's spelled differently every week.
Every week, every time. And we're literally spelling it for it. This is the nuance. We're spelling the word for them and they cannot spell it. That always worries. So now they'll be writing prescriptions though. I wonder if they'll be able to spell them.
Oh, they definitely won't be able to spell her name right.